A norm that creates conflicts is a perversion instead of is what a rule is supposed to do, namely to help us avoid conflicts. Only private or exclusive property makes it possible that all otherwise unavoidable conflicts can be avoided. A norm that would generate conflict, that creates conflicts, is contrary to the very purpose of a norm or a rule. The state is not only an institution that produces inferior goods, bad goods, low quality goods, but it actually produces bads. That is to say, goods that are not really goods at all, what we call bads. The state is an agency that exercises a territorial monopoly of ultimate decision making. If you can decide who is right and wrong in every case, even in cases involving yourself, then you will provoke and cause conflicts. And then, of course, decide these conflicts in your own favor. States will substitute legislation for law. They make the law. They make laws and say, it is all right if I hit you on the head sometimes. A norm that creates conflicts is a perversion. If you can decide who is right and wrong in every case, even in cases involving yourself, then you will provoke and cause conflicts. The institution of private property is definitely not just a convention, because no alternative to it exists. Only private or exclusive property makes it possible that all otherwise unavoidable conflicts can be avoided. And only the principle of property acquisition by acts of original appropriation, that is, of appropriating something that was previously unowned, makes it possible that conflicts can be avoided from the beginning of mankind on, so to speak, until its very end. Because the first appropriator of something did not involve anyone in any conflict. He was the first one. Nobody else was there. So the first appropriation of something as private property is a conflict-free way of transferring something was previously some external thing into something that is private property.
Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the No Way Jose podcast. Today I'm joined again by my friend Toad, and we're going to knock out another episode, another live reading of Democracy, the God That Failed. We're on part 22 this time around. We are in the chapter on government and the private production of defense on part 4, and moving on from there. Without any further ado, let's go ahead and bring my friend Toad in here and get into it. What's up, my friend?
What's up, man?
Not much. I guess since we're kind of making this a little bit of a time capsule thing, nothing's really changed too much since the last time, although I think there probably has been some other sequentialing of doubling, tripling, whatever down from Trump. So I think the latest, for those who are interested in the fun little time capsule, depending on when you watch this component of this show, the latest is the Wall Street Journal did put out some sort of hit piece, which was supposedly a handwritten little note / little drawing from Trump to Jeffrey Epstein for Jeffrey Epstein's 50th birthday in like a book that was put together of like little, bromides and things like that, little things, accumulated together with other friends of his, including Alan Dershowitz and some other, and Wexler and some other figures that if you were familiar with Epstein lore, you would be familiar with, that supposedly are all in this and left little notes, so now MAGA World is denying whether it's real or not. The Wall Street Journal did not put out the actual photo of it, so it's just the claim. So, and supposedly Trump is suing Murdoch, who owns the Wall Street Journal now. And so all this will have to come out in Discovery. So we are at a very interesting time. The next few episodes, when we give you these little interesting updates of what the hell is going on in the world while we're reading The Live Democracy of the God That Failed, will probably be quite interesting, because we are very much in a time where either the Wall Street Journal is lying or Trump's lying, and it's probably all going to come out in Discovery. So fun time to point out how ridiculous the state is.
Yeah, exactly. I'm just like, I'm thinking it has to be real, even though the New York Times lie about everything.
Yeah, it's too big to I don't know, whatever. I guess it could be complete BS, but
they wouldn't be creative enough to make that up.
Yeah, and it is funny. All of his excuses were like, "Oh, I don't ever do doodles," and then you're like. Then there was
it wasn't a doodle. It was art. It was the greatest picture ever drawn of a naked
come to find
lady.
out, he's done all sorts of doodles, up to including I think one got sold for like $30,000. I think it was like a charity thing or something.
Yeah,
so it's not like
literally
actually
Hitler,
valued
so
that.
it makes
But
sense.
so yeah, he's doing all these little doodles that were just basically like that. He even said enigma, I guess, in the note. And people try to point out, oh, that's not a word he says. And there's but then there's plenty of examples of him using certain words. So I don't know. The more and more, it's kind of looks like probably is real. But I don't know. Maybe it's complete bullshit. What?
Because the word enigma was like. It seemed totally out of context in that note. I thought it was like code for like little girls or something.
I've heard that it could be, but I don't know. I guess we're not going to sit here for a live reading of Democracy of the God That Failed and try to understand the secret code being talked amongst Epstein. What evil language do they have? Is theirs different from the Hillary Clinton sect where they talk about pizzas and hot dogs and stuff? What's the Trump side of this? What's their lingo? I don't know.
I think they all use that lingo because like Chrissy Teigen was using it in all those tweets that she removed. I think they all use that common lingo because how else would they understand each other?
Yeah, well, that was a joke. That just was like they had different lingo. But
anyways,
us trying to interpret it. But we will interpret it from an intellectual perspective of the state and what a joke it is and what we can do about it with our continuing of this reading. So we are on page 247. I'll go ahead and I guess get it started to get into it. Having reconstructed the myth of collective security, the myth of the state, and criticized it on theoretical and empirical grounds, I now must take on the task of constructing the positive case for private security and protection. In order to dispel the myth of collective security, it is not just sufficient to grasp the error involved in the idea of a protective state. It is just as important, if not more so, to gain a clear understanding of how the non-status security alternative would effectively work. Rothbard, building on the path-breaking analysis of the French-Belgian economist Gustave de Molinari, has given us a sketch of the workings of a free market system of protection and defense. As well, we are in debt to Morris and Linda Tannehill for their brilliant insights and analysis in this regard. Following their lead, I will proceed with my analysis and provide a more comprehensive view of the alternative non-statist system of security protection and its ability to handle attacks not just by individuals or gangs, but in particular also by states. Widespread agreement exists among liberal libertarians such as Molinari, Rothbard, and the Tannehills, as well as most other commentators on the matter that defense is a form of insurance and defense expenditures represent a sort of insurance premium. Accordingly, as Rothbard and the Tannehills in particular would emphasize, within the framework of a complex modern economy based on worldwide division of labor, the most likely candidates to offer protection and defense services are insurance agencies. The better the protection of insured property, the lower are the damage claims and hence an insurer's cost. Thus, to provide efficient protection appears to be in every insurer's own financial interest. Indeed, although restricted and hampered by the state, even now insurance agencies provide wide-ranging services of protection and indemnification, compensation to injured private parties. Insurance companies fulfill a second essential requirement. Obviously, anyone offering protection services must appear able to deliver on his promises in order to find clients. That is, he must possess the economic means, the manpower, as well as the physical resources necessary to accomplish the task of dealing with the dangers, actual or imagined, of the real world. On this count, insurance agencies appear to be perfect candidates too. They operate on a nationwide and even international scale, and they own large property holdings dispersed over wide territories and beyond single state boundaries. Accordingly, they have a manifest self-interest in effective protection and are big and economically powerful. Furthermore, all insurance agencies are connected through a network of contractual agreements of mutual assistance and arbitration, as well as a system of international reinsurance agencies representing a combined economic power which dwarfs that of most existing governments. So, in short, chaos theory by Bob Murphy.
Well, yeah, chaos theory. So, I mean, yeah, so basically he did just kind of, he began that by outlining what we already talked about, which is we talked about mostly the failings of government to provide property protection. Now he's talking about, well, how would
I am right. Wait, chaos theory goes
work?
big into that, right? Or am I thinking of another?
No, yes, you're correct. Yes.
Okay.
I'm just saying what Hoppe's saying here, but yes. So what he just described there is similar to Bob Murphy's chaos theory. It is also similar to Rothbard, I believe, talks about this in For New Liberty as well.
That's what a lot of them seem to come. The conclusion a lot of them come to is it likely would be, even though I think they probably all also make the point that like trying to predict what would happen in a true market is kind of hard to do. It's just more of an easy thing to imagine. So obviously we don't know for certain it would necessarily be insurance agencies. It just seems to make the most sense.
Right, because he's saying the incentives would line up, because if you have an insurance company, their incentive is going to be they want the damage to your property to be limited as well, so they don't have to pay you as much. So the incentive lines up that way. You don't want your property damaged because it's your property and you don't want it damaged. So all the incentives would line up. So that's I mean, I think it does make sense.
Yeah, I mean, it would make sense to have like you're making large. I don't know. There are all sorts of things you can get insurance for that would work for this purpose. But whenever you're ready, you can pick up, bud.
Right. Although I somewhat disagree with the last thing he said about like, oh, it would be even better because these insurance agencies are like massive corporations or something. I'm like, wait, what the fuck? Like,
well, I think he's saying they're powerful, but their power comes from a. He even then makes the point how this is like they are powerful, but they're also a network of mutual agreements. So it's like it is powerful, but it's powerful for the purpose of with which you'd want it to be. I think I get what you're saying.
They're all like bastardized by government.
Yeah. Well, that's. I mean, he's saying he's even kind of addressed that in that kind of that like even despite, and you got to think also when you wrote this. This was when was this? Like early 2000s. This might have been
it was like right around 2000. It was like
so it was even before Obamacare, I think. Right? When did Obamacare go into place? Was it early 2000s? Right? Something like that.
It was during Obama's administration.
Yeah. So my point being, insurance would have been a little bit more of a
probably somewhere around 2010.
Yeah, it probably wasn't in such a dog shit state essentially like it is now. So I think you could judge it a little bit different. And even then, I think everyone's mind goes to home or goes to health insurance. There's other insurances that haven't been quite, I guess, as fucked with. I mean, maybe you could say home, maybe a little bit. I don't know, but yeah. Anyways, I get what you mean. There definitely is a issue with corporations and large thing, but he did also then make the point that these are based on mutual assistance agreements, and he's also somewhat imagining like in a true free market type sense. So right.
Right. You would want it to be an insurance company that actually does insurance, which is risk. Yeah, like it's risk management. Or not risk management, but you know what I'm saying. Like it's disaster coverage basically, whereas of course health insurance is not that right now at all. But other types of insurance basically still are, like homeowners insurance or whatever. Like you have to pay it, but it's going to cover you if you have damage to it. Like car insurance, less bastardized, kind of works like insurance should. So yeah, I mean, get what he's saying there. Yeah,
exactly.
All right.
And to give him a little bit of fairness, like I said, he also was writing this at a time where insurance wasn't as god-awful as it is now. But the reason why it's god-awful is because of the state intervention. So keep that in mind. So,
right.
Yeah.
All right. Let me further analyze and systematically clarify this suggestion that protection and defense are insurance and can be provided by insurance agencies. To reach this goal, two issues must be addressed. First off, it is not possible to insure oneself against every risk of life. I cannot insure myself against committing suicide, for instance, or against burning down my own house, becoming unemployed, not feeling like getting out of bed in the morning, or not suffering entrepreneurial losses. because in each case I have full or partial control over the likelihood of the respective outcome. Risks such as these must be assumed individually. No one but I can possibly deal with them. Hence, the first question must be, what makes protection and defense an insurable rather than an uninsurable risk? After all, we've just seen this is not self-evident. In fact, does not everyone have considerable control over the likelihood of an attack on and invasion of his person and property? Do I not deliberately bring about an attack by assaulting or provoking someone else, for instance? And is not protection then an uninsurable risk like suicide or unemployment for which each person must assume sole responsibility? Yeah, so he's about to get into, like what is insurable? Like what would the system look like if insurance was dealing with property protection? Of course, he's saying, well, you can't insure something that, deals with something you're going to do to yourself. But that's kind of the case now, right? Like if you have home insurance and you burn down your own house, like there's going to be an investigation, and if you get caught doing that, obviously you're going to get charged with fraud. And you're going to go to jail.
Exactly. So you're technically not insured against burning your own house down. That's why they have the investigation. So
Right. So that is the case now, even though the state is doing it. So it might even kind of wind up being something similar to that. He might say something like that. But obviously, I think what he's getting at here is that you should be insured against damage it's probably going to be damage from like natural disasters and damage from
damage
other
that
people.
You don't bring upon yourself.
Right.
Essentially.
So if you provoke somebody, you're probably not going to be insured against that. But if somebody just, unprovoked, they just come over and damage your shit, then you should be insured against that.
Mm-hmm.
All right. The answer is a qualified yes and no. Yes, insofar as no one can possibly offer unconditional protection, i.e. insurance against any invasion whatsoever. That is, unconditional protection can only be provided, if at all, by each individual on his own and for himself. But the answer is no insofar as conditional protection is concerned. Only attacks and invasions that are provoked by the victim cannot be insured. Unprovoked and thus accidental attacks can be insured against, however. That is, protection becomes an insurable good only if and insofar as an insurance agent contractually restricts the actions of the insured so as to exclude every possible provocation on their part. Various insurance companies may differ with respect to the specific definition of provocation, but there can be no difference between insurers with regard to the principle that everyone must systematically exclude, prohibit all provocative and aggressive action among its own clients.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so he's sort of starting to get into like the realm of, if you have multiple different insurance agencies, then you have like a free market type of thing where there's competition. So maybe certain insurance agencies will be more, like lenient in certain ways about what they insure. Maybe they'll insure more than other agencies will. So you get to choose between them. So there is competition. So that would be a better setup than what we have now. And of course, he's basically saying what I just said, like, if you provoke, something that causes the damage to your property, you're probably not going to be insured against that. But there might have to be some, third party that comes in and does an investigation or something that probably also works with the insurance company, But that could all happen through the free market.
Yeah, and they even are kind of getting at, too, that they would disincentivize any sort of infractions amongst their own clients since they clearly have incentives to do so. And then really any really at all, since they obviously, which I'm sure he'll get into more, he's not really making this point yet, but he will get to later. Part of the reason why insurance is great is because they don't want these costs. So they are going to find ways to, whether that's, a lot of people are like, oh, who would build the roads or this or that, or who would do this, who would do that. A lot of this is answered by like insurance, because it's like they're incentivized for these things. So they're incentivized to, to essentially pad the world around us, make it safe, make it accessible, whatever. And not necessarily everything would be them, but there's a lot of things that essentially get incentivized via a insurance network, in a properly proper acting free market, essentially.
Who would insure the roads?
Yeah, where would the cops come? Actually, be a better example would be like cops would probably be a better example. Like literally, you could imagine in super mega ANCAP world, like literally like insurance provided security, essentially, of some sort. You know, I think
Yeah.
maybe they're somehow subcontracted out under, you know, whatever different group, and they, you know, I don't know,
Yeah.
kind of almost like the way you look at like cable lines and cable insurers type deal. Like it may even be like you still get the same security depending on what security company you have, and it might still literally be the same guys who come. It's just the way that like
Yeah.
the different deals are worked out or whatever. There's all sorts of arrangements that can be made, essentially.
Yeah, it probably would be something like that, where the insurance company might work with some security company, and they would work in tandem, to provide those services.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I
that-
use
that
the
would make
example of
sense,
like
yeah.
cable companies or internet companies because a lot of times they'll share the same lines and everything. They'll just be like, but they have, you know, separate whatever. I don't know, maybe not the greatest example, but
Right.
anyways.
Right, and he did also mention, on top of all that, you can obviously provide your own security, to every extent that you want, basically, as long as you're able to do it. You can defend yourself, with guns and whatever, and defend your own property. Well, he's saying that you should be able to, at the very least. All right. As elementary as this first insight into the essentially defensive, non-aggressive, and non-provocative nature of protection insurance may seem, it is of fundamental importance. For one, it implies that any known aggressor and provocateur would be unable to find an insurer and hence would be economically isolated, weak, and vulnerable. On the other hand, it implies that anyone wanting more protection than that afforded by self-reliant self-defense could do so only if and insofar as he submitted himself to the specified norms of non-aggressive, civilized conduct. Further, the greater the number of insured people, and in a modern exchange economy, most people want more than just self-defense for their protection, the greater would be the economic pressure on the remaining uninsured to adopt the same or similar standards of non-aggressive social conduct. Moreover, as the result of competition between insurers for voluntarily paying clients, a tendency toward falling prices per insured property values would come about.
Now, this is kind of getting
Yeah,
at where I was
interesting.
sort of the larger point I was kind of getting at a little bit, and I was like, maybe that's not the greater point, although he kind of actually made it for me. The idea of how even you could actually go as crazy with it as, hey, well, even so far as these insurance companies would have incentives to form the social environment around you, because essentially they're even getting the point that essentially, they would get certain clients, they would have to be as terms of being clients for this insurance company, they would have to agree to certain preconditions or whatever, and then there would come a certain point where they're like, hey, there's certain people not buying into this whatever system, and they're not wanting to buy into the norms that we have essentially bought into. You see how we're essentially creating like some people might be like, oh, this is basically government without government. Yes, exactly. That's kind of the point. Like we're getting to a point where, in a certain way, we're almost getting to what am I trying to say? The what's it called? What is little communities, covenant communities? Essentially, we're basically getting through covenant communities through. He's almost essentially getting at insurance provided covenant communities, because that would make sense essentially if you really do drive this to its ultimate conclusion, because you would have an area that essentially everyone buys into certain conduct, and as a result, and I don't know. Well, obviously we'll get into that later, but that's essentially, it seems to me, what he's driving to. That's why he brings up this non-aggressive social conduct and how this is conduct that's more conducive towards less property damage, less things the insurance company has to pay for. Because let's be real, a cohesive, happy society is a society that the insurance companies, and this isn't a scenario, aren't paying out the fucking wazoo. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you're sort of talking about the fact that, like, hierarchy still has to exist. Like, there are going to be certain people that are better at certain things. So, at least in the free market, you're going to have a tendency where the people that are the best at providing, like, security and whatever are going to have a tendency to wind up being in that business more so than what you have now. Like, if you have a government scenario where, of course, it's going to be the people that have the ability to gain power are going to wind up in that situation instead. Yeah, so he's talking about that, and he's talking about I think he's kind of going back to what he was talking about, where if you have like these larger like networks of insurance, basically they could like share information still, basically be like, oh, this guy is a guy that we don't want to insure because he doesn't exhibit conduct that that we like or whatever. So, the multiple insurance companies might all be like talking back and forth. Like, yeah, you probably shouldn't insure this guy. So something like that.
Yeah,
might
that
happen
or
as
you're
well,
going to
where-
end up with like one of the worst and even in the scenario I'm kind of providing where you get to a futuristic situation where it's like literally the covenant communities are basically areas that are essentially owned by communities in some way, shape, or form, or these insurance companies, and you're going to be, if you get blacklisted essentially, or hard, you would only applicable for certain plans or whatever the term would be. Well, you might be in the area that people don't really want to be in. That's just maybe how things go. But with that, that also goes for those who want to complain and be like, well, we're going to have, it's going to be, I don't know, authoritarian, wherever and whatever. And okay, then go over to the other one that has the sloppy insurance company that has these different norms or whatever. That's
Right.
really like, you go over a few counties and this one's it's a different insurance company that's managing that part of town and whatever. There's different norms. If you want to live in that area, if you want to buy land under a contractual agreement, then yeah, you're going to have to behave in certain ways. Or you're going to have to find an area where it's just kind of no man's land and they don't have these things. But then now we're getting to a scenario where, hey, you're in the boonies, you got to provide for your own protection. Them's the breaks. So,
Right, so it's essentially the same way he talks about, how like criminals would be treated or whatever. It comes down to people, disassociating with other people.
exactly.
And the ability to be able to do that, yeah. Okay. And then I'm not sure what point he was making there at the end there about property values, tendency towards falling prices per insured property values. Like I guess because those property values would be insured. Does that make sense? I don't know. 'Cause
Yeah,
you
I
would
don't know
think
what he's driving
that
at
if,
there.
Like if you have property that's insured, you would think the value of it would like increase potentially. I don't know. I'm not sure what he's getting at there, but
Yeah, I don't know. I think I've heard them say that though in an actual consistent market where there's not constant inflating and deflating and all that. Like I don't think a property would be as crazy. I don't know. I forget. Whatever. That's
Well,
a
it certainly
separate
wouldn't be,
economic
yeah.
discussion. So
all right. At the same time, a system of competing insurers would have a twofold impact on the development of law and thus contribute further to reduce conflict. On the one hand, the system would allow for systematically increased variability and flexibility of law. Rather than imposing a uniform set of standards onto everyone, as under status conditions, insurance agencies could and would compete against each other, not just via price, but in particular also through product differentiation and development. Insurers could and would differ and distinguish themselves with respect to the behavioral code imposed on and expected of their clients, with respect to rules of evidence and procedure, and or with respect to the sort and assignment of awards and punishments. There could and would exist side by side, for instance, Catholic insurers applying canon law, Jewish insurers applying Mosaic law, Muslims applying Islamic law, and non-believers applying secular law of one variant or another, all of them sustained by and vying for a voluntarily paying clientele. Consumers could and would choose and sometimes change the law applied to them and their property. That is, no one would be forced to live under foreign law, and hence a prominent source of conflict would be eliminated.
So this is exactly what I was getting at earlier, the idea that he's kind of driving at, that essentially you'd be able to create your own norms, which is, let's be real, that's in some senses not much different than what we consider as rules, laws, whatever you want to consider today. And this would allow a flexibility so that you can have, you want to live under, Sharia law? Okay, cool, whatever, there's this area. See how go ahead and play out that experiment. Essentially federalism, if you think about it, taken to its logical conclusion. It's the idea that, we're supposed to have 50 separate states. They're supposed to, have certain rules that they are what the Bill of Rights are supposed to follow. But aside from that, do whatever the hell you want was supposed to be the basic idea. And it's supposed to be an experiment in each little state and see which one's norms work better. Well, that's what Hoppe's proposing for essentially down to the basically atomic level,
Right, and he was talking about how egalitarianism and how it applies to, you have this one, law, essentially, that's being made by the state that's applying to everybody and how that might be bad. And he's talking about how in this scenario, you'd get basically the opposite. And like you said, you'd get, decentralization. People would be able to choose from multiple different companies probably that have rules that they like more. Or, he said prices could differ between them. Yeah, I mean, what type of insurance they give you would be different. Like what rules they have for allowing you to keep your insurance would be different. Yeah, etc.
All right. On the other hand, a system of insurers offering competing law codes would promote a tendency toward the unification of law. The domestic, Catholic, Jewish, Roman, Germanic, etc. law would apply and be binding only on the persons and properties of the insured, the insurer, and others insured by the same insurer under the same law. Canon law, for instance, would apply only to professed Catholics and deal solely with inter-Catholic conflict and conflict resolution. Yet it would also be possible for a Catholic to interact, come into conflict with, and wish to be protected from the subscribers of other law codes, i.e., or e.g., I forget what e.g. stands for, a Muslim. From this, no difficulty would arise so long as Catholic and Islamic law reach the same or a similar conclusion regarding the case and contenders at hand. But if competing law codes arrive at distinctly different conclusions, as they would in at least some cases by virtue of the fact that they represent different law codes, a problem would arise. The insured would want to be protected against the contingency of intergroup conflict too, but domestic intragroup law would be of no avail in this regard. In fact, at a minimum, 2 distinct domestic law codes would be involved and they would come to different conclusions. In such a situation, it could not be expected that one insurer and the subscribers of his law code, say the Catholics, would simply subordinate their judgment to that of another insurer and his law, say that of the Muslims, or vice versa. Rather, each insurer, Catholic and Muslim alike, would have to contribute to the development of intergroup law, i.e., law applicable in cases of disagreement among competing insurers and law codes. And because the intergroup law provisions that insurer offered to his clients could appear credible to them, and hence a good only if and insofar as
What just happened? I think I just lost you, Jose. Shit. I didn't lose internet, did I? No.
Did I lose you?
Yeah, I think so.
That was weird. Where did I lose you? How long was I out?
The last word that I heard was insofar.
Insofar.
It was on somewhere on 250 somewhere.
He says insofar a lot. That doesn't help. Sorry. Well, sorry, everyone. There.
It was credible to them, hence a good only if and insofar as the same provisions were also accepted by other insurers. Yeah.
And some of them, the more of them, the better. Competition would promote the development and refinement of a body of law that incorporated the widest intergroup, cross-cultural, etc., legal, moral consensus and agreement, and thus represented the greatest common denominator among various competing law codes. Once again, I do want to apologize for the connection. Hopefully, I think since I'm able to save local audio, I think I might not have this issue when it goes out to publish. I'm not sure.
Hopefully.
I'm a bit of a tech idiot, so I'm not entirely sure how that'll work. But I do apologize. I did just upgrade my internet recently, so sorry.
EG is for example, by the way.
There
So
you
he
go.
was saying if a Catholic, comes into conflict with
I thought it said use IE.
some
Is
other
IE
religion.
just the same as...
IE means that is.
Oh, okay, whatever. It's
So
the same
IE is more of
thing.
like a clarification, whereas EG is, for example, this thing.
Okay.
So like, coming into contact with somebody that practices some other law, for example, Muslim, whatever.
Yeah, but anyways, they're just making the point here about like intergroup law, essentially the idea that, which is something we already basically have now between states. It's the same idea that, differing codes of law would have to develop essentially a higher code of law that they would have to be able to figure out how to settle disputes. So nothing crazy there. Yeah.
Right, which what he kind of might be getting is that like the things that probably would become common would be like, oh, well, you're gonna have to insure against like basically things that are obvious, like violations of property between one party and another. Like that would probably be something common between all these forms of law. And probably other rules would sort of become common just based on like the competition aspect of it. Like, oh, you guys are doing this and people like this, so we're going to offer that too. You know what I mean?
Yeah. All right, let's get back into it. More specifically, because competing insurers and law codes could and would disagree regarding the merit of at least some of the cases brought jointly before them, every insurer would be compelled to submit itself and its clients in these cases from the outset to arbitration by an independent third party. This third party would not just be independent of the two disagreeing parties, however. It would at the same time be the unanimous choice of both parties. And as objects of unanimous choice, arbitrators then would represent or even personify consensus and agreeability. They would be agreed upon because of their commonly perceived ability of finding and formulating mutually agreeable, i.e., fair solutions in cases of intergroup disagreement. Moreover, if an arbitrator failed in this task and arrived at conclusions that were perceived as unfair or biased by either one of the insurers or their clients, this person would not likely be chosen again as an arbitrator in the future. All right, they're just talking about getting a third party involved and essentially the incentives involved there. Given that this is going to be done in a voluntary manner, this is going to be, i.e., or theoretically, some sort of third-party person that both of them would be willing to agree to, and obviously that knowing that they have their credibility in the line for if this, if they're shown to be unfair by one side or the other, that it can clearly, complicate things for them in the future.
Right, and this is essentially like if you have a dispute between two insured parties, it basically becomes a dispute between the two different insurance providers if they are, if each party has a different insurance provider. That's what he's talking about here. Then you would have to have some third party here, the arbitrator, come in and arbitrate between those two insurance companies, essentially. And, figure it out, basically. And both insurance companies would have to agree. So it's kind of the same thing that he talks about with, like, the judicial system, essentially. It is sort of a form of, like a judiciary as well. So, like, it's going to have to be a party that both people agree to, essentially, for it to be fair. And that is the way the incentives would line up.
Judiciary.
Yes,
Consequently,
exactly.
protection and security contracts would come into existence as the first fundamental result of competition between insurers for a voluntarily paying clientele. Insurers, unlike states, would offer their clients contracts with well-specified property and product descriptions and clearly defined and delineated duties and obligations. Likewise, the relationship between insurers and arbitrators would be defined and governed by contract. Each party to a contract for the duration or until fulfillment of the contract would be bound by its terms and conditions, and every change in the terms or conditions of a contract would require the unanimous consent of all parties concerned. That is, under competition, unlike under status conditions, no legislation would or could exist. No insurer could get away, as the state can, with promising its clients protection without letting them know how or at what price, and insisting that it could, if it so desired, unilaterally change the terms and the conditions of the protector-client relationship. Insurance clients would demand something significantly better, and insurers would comply and supply contracts and constant law instead of promises and shifting and changing legislation. Furthermore, as a result of the continual cooperation of various insurers and arbitrators, a tendency toward the unification of property and contract law and the harmonization of the rules of procedure, evidence, and conflict resolution, including such questions as liability, tort, compensation, and punishment, would be set in motion. On account of buying protection insurance, everyone would become tied into a global competitive enterprise of striving to reduce conflict and enhance security. Moreover, every single conflict and damage claim, regardless where and by or against whom, would fall into the jurisdiction of one or more specific insurance agencies and would be handled either by an individual insurer's domestic law or by the international law provisions and procedures agreed upon in advance by a group of insurers, thus assuring ex ante complete and perfect legal stability and certainty. Whew, that's a lot.
Yeah, so I mean,
it was a lot, but it really wasn't like, so far as what it's saying, it's not really saying all that much, but I'll let you explain.
right.
Go ahead.
Well, I mean, he's saying that, the relationship between the insurance company and the insured would be contractual. So, of course, that's, how you do it voluntarily. Like, what you're signing up for, what you're agreeing to. And then if one party violates that contract, then, of course, the contract, it would wind up being a contract dispute, and then probably some arbitrator would have to come in and arbitrate that. But yeah, I mean, the contracts help with the conflict resolution part of it. So he's basically saying that. And then I think he's just making the point again that there'd be a tendency towards kind of, I guess, like a unification of some of these standards, like based on, like, these are things that work, essentially. People agree with these particular things. I don't know if he's really making any other points in there besides that, really. But.
Exactly, yeah.
All right.
On to you.
Now, a second question must be addressed. Even if the status of defensive protection as an insurable good is granted, distinctly different forms of insurance exist. Let us consider just two characteristic examples: insurance against natural disasters such as earthquakes, floods, hurricanes, and insurance against industrial accidents or disasters such as malfunctions, explosions, and defective products. The former could serve as an example of group or mutual insurance. Some territories are more prone to natural disasters than others. Accordingly, the demand for and price of insurance will be higher in some areas than others. However, every location within certain territorial borders is regarded by the insurer as homogeneous with respect to the risk concerned. The insurer presumably knows the frequency and extent of the event in question for the region as a whole, but he knows nothing about the particular risk of any specific location within the territory. In this case, every insured person will pay the same premium per insured value, and the premiums collected in one time period will presumably be sufficient to cover all damage claims during the same time period. Otherwise, the insurance industry will incur losses. Thus, the particular individual risks are pooled and insured mutually.
Yeah, they're just kind of getting at like things like, if it's something that's like a collective risk, like essentially something regionally. And I think it's also something I took away from that driving, how like this would be a much better way to do things, because now it's just like you get your taxes taken away, ta-da, now you get things. Whereas it's like, nope, you can be, say where I live in Florida, it's like there's hurricanes. So they're like, hey, based in this area, this is what you'll pay. And then you can go even further with it. I know they're using natural disasters as an example here, is to kind of make it easier, but also even just stuff as like what's going on in the area. Like if you know the crime rates, this, that's also going to affect your premiums too. So anyways, yeah, I think that's just kind of what it's getting at, that it would really just be, where you live, where you work, all the different things these would be, premiums. So
right,
differing premiums.
Yeah, like some natural disasters, it would probably be more like granular, like flood insurance and stuff. Like you're probably going to be, you're looking at, more just like people that are right on the coast and whatever are going to be more susceptible to that damage and stuff like that. Whereas a hurricane is probably a wider like scope of, coverage there. Like all of Florida, all of the Gulf Coast states essentially, and the East Coast states. But, you kind of get what he's getting at there. It might be like a more mutual thing, which we actually do. We have stuff like that now in health insurance, right? Like there are mutual like health insurance sort of providers that are out there right now that are alternative health insurance solutions. That I know Tom Woods like was promoting some of those in the past. Where people like pool their money together, and it's all just agreed upon. Like, hey, we're all just going to put our money into this, and I don't know what the deal is with like how, which people might have to pay more into it or whatever. Like, I'm assuming people might have to pay more into those if they have more risk or whatever. So maybe it's not quite the same, but I know people do pool their money into those, and then just it's agreed that like money will just come out of this pool.
Yep.
For the
called health shares.
The healthcare for whoever is in there. Yeah.
Yeah, those are
Whoever
called health
needs
shares.
it.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Okay. In contrast, industrial insurance can serve as an example of individual insurance. Unlike natural disasters, the insured risk is the outcome of human action, i.e. of production efforts. Every production process is under the control of an individual producer. No producer intends to fail or experience a disaster, and as we have seen, only accidental, non-intended disasters are insurable. Yet, even if production is largely controlled and generally successful, every producer and production technology is subject to occasional mishaps and accidents beyond his control, a margin of error. However, since it is the outcome, intended or not, of individual production efforts and production techniques, this risk of industrial accidents is essentially different from one producer and production process to another. Accordingly, the risk of different producers and production technologies cannot be pooled, and every producer must be insured individually. In this case, the insurer will have to know the frequency of the questionable event over time, but he cannot know the likelihood of the event at any specific point in time, except that at all times the same producer and production technology are in operation. There is no presumption that the premiums collected during any given period will be sufficient to cover all damage claims arising during that period. Rather, the profit-making presumption is that all premiums collected over many time periods will be sufficient to cover all claims during the same multi-period time span. Consequently, in this case, an insurer must hold capital reserves in order to fulfill its contractual obligation, and in calculating his premiums, he must take the present value of these reserves into account.
All right, they're just making the example of how you can do it individually, you can do it collectively, and the different methods in which they would go about it. And it's the idea of like, I mean, let's be real. We all know that like it's the idea that you're agreeing to, they're agreeing to take on the risk of whatever given event. Essentially, I don't know. It's a complicated way of explaining all of that, but yeah, they could do it on a large level when it's a some sort of risk that's collectivized amongst everyone. It's essentially damn near uniform, and then you can do it on an individual level where there's varying risks, and you can vary the premiums depending on the varied risk.
Right. And in this case, I think you have two like different forms of insurance going on here, right? Where you have you might have like homeowner insurance or some property insurance of some kind for, the civilians in that area. And then the industry that he's talking about here would also have their own form of insurance that is, to help pay for like essentially if they have an accident, basically their insurance is covering that, is what he's saying basically. Like, obviously the insurance is not going to cover if that industrial producer or whatever does something intentional and goes, oh, I'm going to intentionally poison all these people in this area. No, but you are insured against accidents. Like if there's an accident at this power plant or whatever and winds up damaging property in the area or whatever, yeah, you'd be insured against that, is basically what he's saying. And like the company, that had that accident happen would be insured against it. And how much they have to pay for the insurance depends on how accident prone they are, essentially, and other things. Probably the insurance for the people in that area would probably, that price would have to probably do with them being near that like industry or whatever. And yeah, I mean, that's, I don't know. He was making the other, he basically is sort of saying that the insurance companies would almost wind up becoming banks in a sort of way where like they're going to have to have that
capital.
money on hand because they need to at least have enough money to potentially, to be able to pay out.
Yeah, that was the idea they were getting at, that like they're not assuming the, whenever you pay your premium, it's not like that was going to cover whatever, fuck happens to you. It's the idea that they need to have this capital backed up because there's an awareness that you're jumping on and there's a hazardous risk of an exorbitant amount of money, but the chances of that happening are low, and so it's worth whatever given premium you give them. And they're also taking the gamble that over the given period of time that you are a client for them, likely the income through which they will receive from your premiums will outweigh whatever likely you probably won't have that risk, or even if they do have that risk, they're hoping that they will at least come close to recouping it. And if they don't, then they figure the math based off of other clients will make up for that essentially. Mm-hmm. So essentially they're riding the risk, and they think they'll likely get their money's worth out of you essentially. So so they have the capital that you don't have essentially. So you're saying I don't have the capital for some sort of major disaster. So they're offsetting the capital, but essentially it's no different than a loan, is the point he's making. That you're still going to pay for that in the long run in a certain sense, but it's still probably a smarter sense that because you don't have that capital on hand. So,
right.
Yeah. Anyways.
Yeah. The second question is, what kind of insurance can protect against aggression and invasion by other actors? Can it be provided as group insurance as for natural disasters, or must it be offered in the form of individual insurance, as is the case of industrial accidents? So I think he's about to get into crime statistics now, probably, like you were just alluding to. Maybe. Note that both forms of insurance represent only the two possible extremes of a continuum, and that the position of any particular risk on this continuum is not definitively fixed. Owing to scientific and technological advances in meteorology, geology, or engineering, for instance, risks that were formerly regarded as homogeneous, allowing for mutual insurance, can become more and more dehomogenized. Noteworthy is this tendency in the field of medical and health insurance. With the advances of genetics and genetic engineering, genetic fingerprinting, medical and health risks previously regarded as homogeneous, unspecific, with respect to large numbers of people, have become increasingly more specific and heterogeneous. Heterogeneous. I don't know how you pronounce that one, but heterogeneous because it's like homogeneous.
Probably can keep going for that part. At least finish it off.
Yeah. with this in mind, can anything specific be said about protection insurance in particular? I would think so. After all, while all insurance requires that the risk be accidental from the standpoint of the insurer and the insured, the accident of an aggressive invasion is distinctly different from that of natural or industrial disasters. Whereas natural disasters and industrial accidents are the outcome of natural forces and the operation of the laws of nature, aggression is the outcome of human actions. And whereas nature is blind and does not discriminate between individuals, whether at the same point in time or over time, an aggressor can discriminate and deliberately target specific victims and choose the timing of his attack.
All right, we're obviously building up into what this fucking whole chapter is about. You know, who's going to create the defense, how we're going to go about it. So,
right. So, yeah, as we're talking about the crime rate in that area is probably going to have something to do with that, right? And I remember this. I mean, we'll get to it as we go in here, but I remember this part being like pretty good and one of the better parts of the book. Before that, he basically just made the point that, well, insurance is going to be sort of on a like there's more of a spectrum than what he was saying earlier, where you're like for natural disasters, everything's just going to be pooled. But I was saying, well, it might be more granular than that. And he's saying that, yeah, it might be like you might have specific. Like more specific areas based on the weather, you know, us knowing more about the weather now that, you can get way more specific about this specific area is going to have different insurance rates than this one, whatever. And then he made the point that happens in the health industry. Obviously, like individual health definitely factors into what your, rate is going to be and whatever.
Well, which is going to make it so that you need, you can reduce premiums, you can, because they have to reduce, they don't have to cover as much. I mean, it's better for everyone altogether. So.
We're going to do section 6.
Yes,
as well?
it's 6. We're going to, we're either going to end in 6 or 7. So
all right, because otherwise we're ending on a cliffhanger there.
Yeah.
We want to talk about crime.
Let's do it.
All right.
Is it my turn?
I think it's on to you now, yeah.
Oh, I'm an idiot.
Yeah.
Let me first contrast defense protection insurance with that against natural disasters. Frequently, an analogy between the two is drawn. It is instructive to examine if or to what extent it holds. The analogy is that just as every individual within certain geographical regions is threatened by the same risk of earthquakes, flood, or hurricanes, so does every inhabitant within the territory of the U.S. or Germany, for instance, face the same risk of being victimized by a foreign attack. Some superficial similarity, to which I shall come shortly, notwithstanding, it is easy to recognize two fundamental shortcomings in this analogy. For one, the borders of earthquake, flood, or hurricane regions are established according to objective physical criteria and hence can be referred to as natural. In distinct contrast, political boundaries are artificial boundaries. The borders of the U.S. changed throughout the entire 19th century, and Germany did not exist as such until 1871 and was composed of 38 separate countries. Surely no one would want to claim that this redrawing of the U.S. or German borders was the outcome of the discovery that the security risk of every American or German within the greater U.S. or Germany was, contrary to the previously held opposite belief, homogeneous, identical.
Right, yeah. So he's saying that there might be, like I guess in this setup, there might be insurance as far as like insuring against foreign invasion as well. But I would say that's clearly not the same thing as natural disasters. And like specific areas will be prone to natural disasters, but I think it's pretty obvious specific areas are more prone to foreign invasion as well. Like, I think it's pretty obvious that places closer to the border are going to be more prone to that. Or
well, although he's making
more
the
high
point,
population areas.
You got to think also he's making the point in this future theoretical scenario. And then also, he's also making the point here that borders somewhat, to some degree, are sort of arbitrary because they've changed so much. Yeah. And so he's kind of making the point, and then also, I think he's sort of making the point that like kind of like in this theoretical, like how do we do this without a state? There's not a state. So like this dynamic of like foreign invasion component, I think a lot of stuff we've talked about in previous chapters, it kind of takes away that. So. The dynamic would be very different in this other scenario, essentially.
Right, if everything is private
but
property,
even still, you still have the correct point. They're very, but he's trying to make a point here. But you are correct. Technically, there would still even then be geographical regions that you could probably logically say certain things are, that are hazards via humanity are more likely in certain geographical locations or whatever.
Right, but if you have your, Ancapistan here, but all the other countries, in the world are have states
Yeah.
besides yours, right? Then a foreign
Then those
invasion,
borders are gonna
right, would
yeah.
be a possible thing. Yeah, and like
Exactly.
of course, if we look at the U.S. right now, I think I would say obviously you're going to be a lot less
Although
prone
then
to that
the
type of thing
only-
if you're in the middle of nowhere in the middle of the country, I think you're going to be less prone to that type of thing.
Although in this theory in Ancapistan, if someone from other state comes over, for one, and they would need to have some sort of some way to get there.
Right,
like,
they'd have to have a Hoppian sponsorship.
Yeah, they'd have to have a Hoppian sponsorship. But like, two, even if they did, wouldn't be coming to a welfare system. So it's like, okay, well, contribute.
Right. But I'm talking about what if they decide to violently attack?
Yeah, I guess.
Although
I guess you could still. I guess I'm just trying to. But anyways, we're missing the point. He's trying to say.
Yeah.
Essentially, that he's just trying to point out differences and risks and stuff. Yeah, we're just being a little bit over pedantic. Okay, maybe he didn't pick the greatest example, but he's just trying to make the point that there's certain things that are uniform risks, certain that are more individual, whatever. That's the only point he's making.
Right.
Because there's a second obvious shortcoming: nature, earthquakes, floods, hurricanes is blind in its destruction. It does not discriminate more and less valuable locations and objects, but attacks indiscriminately. So, in a distinct contrast, an aggressor invader can and does discriminate. He does not attack or invade worthless locations and things like the Sahara Desert, but targets locations and things that are valuable. Other things being equal, the more valuable a location and object, the more likely it will be the target of an invasion. So he's just kind of making the point that, like, you can obviously logically kind of note what requires more or less protection, as opposed to the current scheme we have, which theoretically we all have equal protection, although we know that's not really how that works anyways. Right. They have their own arbitrary focuses of a protection, as opposed to this free market where they would be intelligently likely divvying out the amount. And accordingly, the different areas would probably have to pay more or less, depending on whether they require more or less protection too. Yeah.
Basically, like natural disasters, you can kind of predict them, but they're random as far as, who they're really going to hit. You just kind of can predict them in a given area or whatever. He's basically going to say crime is not really that way. That's actually humans acting, so you can predict it based on human behavior. They're going to attack more valuable targets and whatever. And I believe he's probably about to say something to the effect of, like based on this, if the state exists or whatever, it's going to cause crime rate to increase in a bunch of areas. I think he already said that in this book, and that's going to cause you to.
I think it's literally probably the next. I think it might literally be the next.
I think
paragraph.
he already said it earlier in the book too, but it's going to cause you to have to like put more money into defending your own property than you would otherwise, right? Because there's this constant threat of crime more than there would be otherwise. So you actually have to spend more time on that. So he's probably going to say, that in this context, you'd have to pay more for your insurance in that type of area.
Yeah. This raises the next crucial question. If political borders are arbitrary and attacks are never indiscriminate but directly, specifically toward valuable places and things, are there any non-arbitrary borders separating different security risk attack zones? The answer is yes. Such non-arbitrary borders are those of private property. Private property is the result of the appropriation and/or production of particular physical objects or effects by specific individuals at specific locations. Every appropriator, producer, owner demonstrates with his actions that he regards the appropriated and produced things as valuable goods, otherwise he would not have appropriated or produced them. The borders of everyone's property are objective and intersubjectively ascertainable. They are simply determined by the extension and dimension of the things appropriated and/or produced by any one particular individual, and the borders of all valuable places and things are coextensive with the borders of all property. At any given point in time, every valuable place and thing is owned by someone. Only worthless places and things are owned by no one.
Yeah, so essentially, like with state borders, basically, you can't really tell like whose property is that really. So how do you insure against that? On an individual basis, like you can't really do that as much. But obviously, when you have all private property, you absolutely know this is this guy's property. That is the property that you're insuring.
He clearly values it. Like that clearly needs. So. But as opposed to like the point you're getting at, that if it was a state collectively owned, how do you ascertain if something's valuable? Because you're like, I mean, I guess there's logic you can apply, but it's like, it's collectively owned. Theoretically, it's like, as opposed to, All right, surrounded by other men, every appropriator and producer can also become the object of an attack or invasion. Every property, in contrast to things, is necessarily valuable. Hence, every property owner becomes a possible target of other men's aggressive desires. Consequently, every owner's choice of the location and form of his property will, among countless other considerations, also be influenced by security concerns. Other things equal, everyone will prefer safer locations and forms of property to locations and forms which are less safe. Yet, regardless of where an owner and his property are located and whatever the property's physical form, every owner, by virtue of not abandoning his property even in view of potential aggression, demonstrates his personal willingness to protect and defend those possessions. However, if the borders of private property are the only non-arbitrary borders standing in systematic relation to the risk of aggression, then it follows that as many different security zones as there are separately owned property holdings exist, and that these zones are no larger than the extension of these holdings. That is, even more so than in the case of industrial accidents, the insurance of property against aggression would seem to be an example of individual rather than group protection.
Yeah, so it's insurance down to the individual level. Yeah, as far as like, you're insuring this person's property. I mean, that's kind of how you have to do it, because it's really based on what is the property that this guy holds, like what is its value. Everybody's property is at a different value. Even if generally like values might be up or down in a particular area based on crime or whatever, but yeah, everybody has their own property that's of a certain value.
Exactly. Whereas the accident risk of an individual production process is typically independent of its location, such that if the process were replicated by the same producer at different locations, his margin of error would remain the same. The risk of aggression against private property, the production plant, is different from one location to another. By its very nature as privately appropriated and produced goods, property is always separate and distinct. Every property is located at a different place and under the control of a different individual, and each location faces a unique security risk. It can make a difference for my security, for instance, if I reside in the countryside or the city, on a hill or in a valley, or near or far from a river, ocean, harbor, railroad, or street. In fact, even contiguous locations do not face the same risk. It can make a difference, for instance, if I reside higher or lower on the mountain than my neighbor, upstream or downstream, closer or more distant from the ocean, or simply north, south, west, or east of him. Moreover, every property, wherever it is located, can be shaped and transformed by its owner so as to increase its safety and reduce the likelihood of aggression. I may acquire a gun or safe deposit box, for instance, or I may be able to shoot down an attacking plane from my backyard or own a laser gun that can kill an aggressor thousands of miles away. Thus, no location and no property are like any other. Every owner will have to be insured individually, and to do so, every aggression insurer must hold sufficient capital reserves. So once again, you're kind of getting this idea of them basically essentially being a bank of some sort. So, yeah.
Right. He was talking about, the like industrial like company or whatever would have basically individual insurance as well based on how risk prone they are. And then he's saying, again, the individual person would, you have all certain types of risks depending on like, are you close to like a plant that might have an accident? Are you close to some area where there might be a natural disaster? Are you in a high crime area? All those things are going to factor in.
Well, all right, buddy, man. We only have one more episode, and then we'll be done at the end of this chapter, and then we only have one chapter left. We're coming near the end, man. We're at part 22. I think we will probably beat this, maybe even before 25. I don't know.
It's been 3 years, man.
Yeah, well, it's been a minute. So with that, bud, let people know where they can find you at. We'll do another one of these soon. Maybe a little bit longer than between the last one, because I'm about to go on vacation here next weekend, so we're doing it on a weird day.
Okay,
but
I was wondering.
Yeah, that's why we're doing a weird day. Just the days are all thrown off. But yeah, buddy, let them know where they can find you at. We'll do another one of these again soon.
Yeah, Learn to Toad on Twitter. That's where all my shit posting is. I changed my Instagram to Learn to Toad because I was going to try to get verified, and because Toad is not my actual government name, they wouldn't let me verify. So Instagram is all Better Off Dead content, but it is at Learn to Toad right now. Better Off Dead is the sports betting podcast that I do. That's on YouTube. Do it every day. It's on audio platforms as well. BTTOR. And then I also have Covered in Uke, which is my ukulele YouTube channel, and patreon.com/learn-to-toad. I actually have some Patreon supporters now, so
hell yeah, brother.
That's going. I'm going to be, it's the Patreon paywall stuff is all ukulele content right now, so I'm getting that going right now, getting that up. So hell yeah.
Hell yeah, go support the homie Toad. And if you want to support what I'm doing, leave a like, share, subscribe, comment, leave a 5-star review on iTunes or Spotify. You also can follow me on Twitter at TowerGangJose. Those are all actions you can take that you don't have to chip in a single buck. They don't cost you nothing. But if you do want to help or support the show in the best way you really can, then the best way to do that is at patreon.com/NoWayJose2020 with money. The lowest level is $2, and that's where you get access to early episodes. I usually do about 1 to 2 of these a week of the paywalled episodes, and then I keep about 4 of those behind the paywall in a given time. So that's weeks of paywalled content. You also get access to the ad-free RSS feed. You get access to the Telegram. You get access to the pre-show and priority of the call-ins for me and Austin's weekly live call-in show, Already Dead, which is on Tuesdays at 9:30 p.m. Eastern. And so make sure you can pop in for that one. That goes out on both of our platforms. I believe I said that already. I believe Tuesdays 9:30. Might have fucked that up. Either way, follow me. Oh yeah. Also give a shout out to my sponsors at the end of every episode. My Patreon sponsors is the highest level of my Patreon. Give them a big shout out. For example, the co-host today, which by the way, I guess this isn't why I did this series with Toad, just so you guys know. But I do want to throw out, just so you guys know, I've always offered the $10 level, that you get essentially a free episode. So if there's some sort of, I'd be open to do other live reading series every now and then if there's a book that I'm compelled to do or something, or anything. Just throwing it out there. The $10 level you can do. If you are $10 level, you essentially can curate an episode is what I call it. So you can be the guest or some topic or something. But just throwing it out there. But the highest level, the $20 level and higher, that's the sponsors. That's why I'm shouting you out, my pretty baby boy, at Learn to Toad, you my former co-host. Also at Abrogate D's, at ZOVRECK, at _Infant Zeal, Tim Tuttle, at Jolly on Klebold. Hopefully free my nigga. Will Bell has a delicious blueberry rabbit eye wine. Big fan of the show, Torn May. And then at Wayne, WAYNE, Taculus. And then Jordan Pearson. And with that, we're going to get out of here. Love you all. Bye-bye.